Jake felt panic rising in his chest as he realized what was about to happen. A medical team would examine his wound and determine whether it was serious enough to justify an emergency launch. If they decided it was not life-threatening, then Torres would be denied permission to leave and they would all be trapped on the station until the security forces found them. How long until the medical team gets here? Amy asked Torres. Maybe 5 minutes, Torres replied as he watched the entrance to the docking bay. We need to make your injuries look worse than they actually are if we want to convince them to let us go. Jake looked down at his bloody shirt. The wound in his shoulder was definitely serious, but it was not immediately life-threatening. He had lost a lot of blood, but he was still conscious and able to walk. A trained medical examiner would probably classify it as a moderate injury that could wait for proper treatment. There might be another way, Kate said quietly. What if we create a distraction that forces them to let us leave immediately? Torres looked interested. What kind of distraction did you have in mind? Kate pointed to a control panel near the cargo bay doors. Every ship has emergency systems that can be activated in case of fire or hull breach. If we triggered one of those alarms, it would create chaos throughout the docking bay. In all the confusion, they might not have time to properly examine Jake's injuries. Amy shook her head. That's too risky. If we get caught tampering with safety systems, they'll throw us in prison for sabotage. Jake was about to respond when his computer chirped with yet another message. This one was from an unexpected source. Mr. Martinez, the message read. This is Vorthak. I know you are still on the station, and I know you are trying to escape. I am prepared to offer you a deal. Return the 2 human females to me, and I will ensure that you are allowed to leave safely. Refuse my offer, and I will make sure you never leave this station alive. Jake showed the message to Torres and the 2 girls. Vorthak's threat was serious, and they all knew it. The Draconian had enough money and influence to keep them trapped on Station Omega-7 indefinitely. He also had connections with the criminal underworld that could make their lives very dangerous, even if they somehow managed to escape. He's afraid, Amy said after reading the message. Vorthak is used to getting what he wants through intimidation and violence. The fact that you outbid him in front of all those other aliens has damaged his reputation. He needs to get us back or he'll look weak. Torres nodded in agreement. She's right. Vorthak's whole business depends on other people being afraid of him. If word gets out that a wounded human with limited resources was able to beat him at his own game, it will hurt his credibility. Throughout the sector, Jake was starting to feel dizzy again, and he had to lean against the ship's hull to keep from falling over. The blood loss was definitely getting worse, and he needed medical attention soon, regardless of whether it was enough to justify an emergency launch. Medical team approaching, Torres announced as he spotted several figures in white uniforms walking toward their docking bay. Jake made a quick decision. Help me lie down on the deck, he said to Amy and Kate. Make it look like I collapsed from blood loss. The 2 girls helped Jake lower himself to the metal floor of the docking bay. Amy tore a piece of cloth from her shirt and pressed it against his wound to make it bleed more freely. Kate positioned herself next to him like she was trying to keep him conscious. The medical team consisted of 2 aliens and 1 human doctor. They carried scanners and emergency medical supplies as they approached the group near Torres's ship. The human doctor was a middle-aged woman with short brown hair and tired eyes. What seems to be the problem? The doctor asked as she knelt down beside Jake. Torres spoke up quickly. Gunshot wound to the shoulder. He's been bleeding for over an hour and just collapsed a few minutes ago. I think he's going into shock from blood loss. The doctor ran her scanner over Jake's body and frowned at the readings. His blood pressure is definitely low and his pulse is rapid. This wound needs immediate attention. She looked up at Torres. Where were you planning to take him? Centauri Medical Station, Torres replied. It's the closest facility with trauma surgery capabilities. About 6 hours from here at maximum speed. The doctor considered this for a moment while her alien assistants took additional readings with their equipment. Jake tried to look as weak and pale as possible while fighting the urge to close his eyes. If he actually lost consciousness, they might decide he was too unstable to transport. This patient needs surgery within the next few hours, the doctor finally announced. His condition is serious enough to warrant emergency transport. I'm authorizing immediate departure. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had convinced the medical team that his injuries were life-threatening. Now they just had to hope that Station Control would accept the doctor's recommendation and allow them to leave. The doctor handed Torres a data pad with the medical authorization codes. You'll need to transmit these codes to station control for departure clearance. Make sure you monitor his vital signs during the flight and contact Centauri Medical as soon as you're in range. Torres nodded and helped Amy and Kate get Jake onto his ship. The captain's hands were steady as he activated the communication system and transmitted the medical codes to station control. Station control, this is Liberty's call requesting immediate emergency departure clearance. Medical authorization codes transmitted. Liberty's call, you are cleared for emergency departure. Safe travels and good luck. Torres began the launch sequence while Amy and Kate helped Jake into a passenger seat. The ship's engines came to life with a low rumble that Jake could feel in his bones. After everything they had been through, they were finally going to escape from Station Omega-7. As the Liberty's call lifted off from the docking bay, Jake looked out through a small window and saw the station shrinking away below them. Somewhere down there, Vorthak was probably furious that his valuable human slaves had slipped through his fingers. The Draconian would not give up easily, but at least they had a head start. "How are you feeling?" Amy asked as she sat down in the seat next to Jake. "Like I just spent a fortune to buy the freedom of 2 strangers and nearly got myself killed in the process," Jake replied with a weak smile. "But also like we did something important today. Something that will matter." Kate leaned forward from her seat behind them. "What happens when we reach the medical station? We still don't have enough money to get back to human space." Jake had been thinking about the same problem. Even with free passage to Centauri Medical Station, they would still be far from human territory with very little money left. But he had an idea that might solve their long-term problems. "Remember that treasure account my brother left me," he said. "It contains the location of a crashed colony ship full of valuable salvage. We could form a partnership and go claim that treasure together, split it 3 ways, and all of us would have enough money to start new lives wherever we want." Amy's green eyes lit up with interest. "You'd be willing to share your brother's discovery with us?" "Danny died trying to save your family," Jake replied. "I think he would approve of us working together to honor his memory." Torres called back from the pilot's seat. "We're clear of the station and jumping to hyperspace in 30 seconds. I suggest everyone hold on tight." As the Liberty's call made the jump to hyperspace, Jake felt the strange sensation of reality shifting around them. They were finally free of Station Omega-7 and heading toward an uncertain but hopeful future. Jake Martinez had been bleeding and broke when he walked into that auction hall, but he had found something more valuable than money in the process. He had found proof that humans would sacrifice everything for each other when it mattered most, that sometimes the impossible bid was the only one worth making, and that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy there were still people willing to fight for what was right. The journey to Centauri Medical Station would take 6 hours. After that, they would begin the long trip to the crashed colony ship and the treasure that would give them all a chance at freedom. Jake closed his eyes and smiled as he felt Amy's hand squeeze his good arm in a gesture of gratitude and friendship. They had saved each other, and now they would build a future together among the stars. Jake stared at the message from Captain Ben Torres and felt a spark of hope for the first time since leaving the auction hall. Bay 78 was on the opposite side of the docking level from where they were currently trapped. Getting there would mean crossing through areas that were probably crawling with security forces and bounty hunters, but it was their only chance. "We need to move now," Jake said as he put his computer away. "Torres is offering to help, but he's leaving in 30 minutes whether we make it or not." Amy looked around at all the aliens moving through the docking level corridors.
"How are we going to get past all these security forces without being spotted?" she asked. Jake was about to answer when he noticed something interesting happening nearby.
A group of maintenance workers were wheeling large cargo containers through the corridors on their way to different docking bays. The workers were all wearing identical gray uniforms and helmets that covered most of their faces. More importantly, they were being ignored by the security forces who were focused on looking for 3 humans traveling together. "Follow me," Jake said as he led Amy and Kate toward a service area where several empty cargo containers were stacked against the wall. "We're going to hide inside these containers and let the maintenance crew transport us to Bay 78. It took them several minutes to find containers that were large enough to hold a person and had air holes for breathing. Jake's wounded arm made it difficult for him to climb inside his container, but Amy helped him get situated before climbing into her own hiding spot. Kate was the smallest of the three, so she had the easiest time squeezing into the tight space. They did not have to wait long before a team of maintenance workers arrived to collect the containers. Jake heard alien voices speaking in a language he did not recognize as the workers loaded the containers onto wheeled platforms. The ride through the station corridors was bumpy and uncomfortable, but it was better than walking around in the open, where anyone could spot them. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 15 minutes, Jake felt his container being unloaded and set down on solid ground. He waited until he could no longer hear the maintenance workers before carefully opening the lid and climbing out. They were in a storage area near Bay 78, exactly where they needed to be. Amy and Kate emerged from their containers looking tired and cramped but unharmed. Jake's wounded arm had started bleeding again during the rough ride, and he could see concern in Amy's green eyes as she looked at the fresh blood on his shirt. "You need medical attention soon," she said quietly. "You're losing too much blood." Jake nodded, but he knew they could not stop for medical treatment until they were safely off the station. "Let's find Captain Torres first," he said. "Maybe his ship has a medical bay where we can patch this up properly." They made their way through the storage area toward the entrance to Bay 78. Jake moved slowly and carefully to avoid making his wound worse, but he could feel himself getting weaker with each step. His vision was starting to blur around the edges, and his hands were shaking from blood loss. Bay 78 was much quieter than Bay 94 had been. There were no security forces visible, and only a few aliens moving cargo in and out of the docking area. Jake could see a medium-sized freight ship sitting on the landing platform with its cargo bay doors open. The name Liberty's Call was painted on the side in faded blue letters. A man in his 50s was standing near the ship directing the loading of supplies. He had gray hair and weathered skin that showed he had spent many years traveling through space. When he saw Jake and the two girls approaching, he walked over to meet them. "You must be Martinez," the man said in a friendly voice. "I'm Ben Torres. I heard about what happened at the auction. That was either the bravest thing or the most foolish thing I've ever seen anyone do." Jake managed a weak smile despite the pain in his arm. "Probably a little of both," he admitted. "Thank you for helping us, Captain Torres. I wasn't sure we were going to make it out of this station alive." Torres looked at Jake's bloody shirt with the experienced eye of someone who had seen plenty of violence during his years as a freight captain. "You look like you're about to pass out," he said with concern. "My ship has a basic medical bay. We can get you patched up once we're in hyperspace." "How much will passage cost?" Amy asked in her practical way. "Jake spent most of his money buying our freedom at the auction." Torres scratched his gray beard as he considered the question. "Under normal circumstances, I'd charge about 3,000 credits per person for passage to the outer colonies," he said. "But these aren't normal circumstances. The whole station is buzzing about what Martinez did today. That took guts, and I respect that." Jake felt relief wash over him. Even at a reduced rate, they would still have enough money left over for food and basic supplies during the journey. "What kind of deal are you offering?" he asked. "Free passage for all three of you," Torres said. "Consider it my contribution to the cause of human freedom. I've been fighting the alien slave trade in my own small way for years. It's good to see someone willing to put their money where their mouth is." Before Jake could respond, his computer chirped again with another urgent message. This one made his blood run cold. "Alert," the message read. "Security forces conducting systematic search of all docking bays. Station lockdown initiated. No ships authorized to depart until further notice." Torres read the message over Jake's shoulder and his face went grim. "Well, that changes things," he said. "Looks like they're not going to let us leave quietly." Amy studied the message carefully. "How long does a station lockdown usually last?" she asked. "Could be hours or could be days," Torres replied. "Depends on how badly they want to find you. And judging by the size of that bounty someone posted, I'd say they want to find you pretty badly." Jake leaned against the side of Torres's ship, feeling dizzy and weak. The blood loss was getting worse, and he was not sure how much longer he could stay conscious. "There has to be something we can do," he said. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to search every ship on the station." Torres looked thoughtful for a moment. "There might be one option," he said slowly. "It's risky and probably illegal, but it could work if we're lucky." "What kind of option?" Kate asked nervously. "Emergency launch," Torres explained. "If I can convince station control that we have a medical emergency on board, they might authorize an immediate departure. The problem is that once we launch, we'll have to keep going. If they catch us lying about the emergency, we'll all end up in prison. Jake looked at his bloody shirt and felt another wave of dizziness wash over him. The medical emergency part isn't exactly a lie, he pointed out. I really do need treatment soon or I'm going to pass out. Torres nodded. That's what I was thinking. Your wound is serious enough to qualify as a legitimate emergency. The question is whether station control will believe us, or if they'll think it's just a trick to get you off the station. They were interrupted by the sound of heavy footsteps approaching the docking bay. Through the entrance, Jake could see a squad of security forces moving from bay to bay, conducting their systematic search. The team included both alien officers and human collaborators who worked for station security. Decision time, Torres said urgently. We can try the emergency launch or we can hide and hope they don't find us. Either way, we need to choose right now. Jake looked at Amy and Kate and saw determination in their faces despite the fear in their eyes. They had already been through so much that they were willing to risk anything for a chance at freedom. Let's try the emergency launch, he said. We've come this far. Might as well go all the way. Torres nodded and activated his ship's communication system. Station control, this is Captain Ben Torres requesting immediate emergency departure authorization, he said in an urgent voice. I have a passenger with severe trauma injuries who needs medical attention that exceeds my ship's capabilities. Request permission to depart for the nearest medical facility. The response came back quickly. Liberty's call standby for medical verification. We are dispatching a medical team to confirm the nature of the emergency. Torres looked at Jake with worry in his eyes. They're sending someone to examine you, he said. If the medical team determines that your injuries aren't serious enough to justify an emergency launch, we're all in trouble. The collection area was a small gray room with metal walls and bright white lights that hurt Jake's eyes. Amy and Kate Sullivan stood next to a desk where a bored-looking alien clerk was preparing their transfer papers. The clerk was a beetle-like creature with 6 arms and compound eyes that reflected the light like mirrors. It moved with quick, jerky motions as it stamped documents and entered data into its computer. Jake approached the desk slowly, trying not to let the girl see how much pain he was in. His wounded arm felt like it was on fire and dark spots danced at the edges of his vision, but he forced himself to stand straight and act like everything was under control. Identification, please, the clerk said in a buzzing voice without looking up from its paperwork. Jake handed over his identity card and waited while the alien scanned it with a handheld device. The process took longer than usual because the clerk kept double-checking the payment information. 100,000 credits was apparently enough money to trigger extra security protocols. Everything appears to be in order, the clerk finally announced. You now own these 2 human females according to the laws of Station Omega-7. They are your property to do with as you wish. Sign here and here and here. Jake signed the papers with his good hand while trying not to think about what the clerk had just said. Technically, Amy and Kate were now his slaves according to station law. The idea made him sick to his stomach, but it was the only way he could get them away from Vorthak and the other buyers. The transaction is complete, the clerk said as it handed Jake a data chip containing all the ownership documents. Please remove your property from the collection area within the next 10 minutes or you will be charged storage fees. Amy and Kate were released from their chains and led over to where Jake was standing. Up close, he could see that both girls were thinner than they should be. Their clothes were dirty and their faces showed the exhaustion that came from weeks of captivity and fear. But their eyes were still bright with intelligence and determination. Amy was the first to speak. Why did you do this? She asked in a quiet voice. You don't even know who we are. Jake looked into her green eyes and saw the same fierce spirit that his brother Danny had possessed. It was the kind of strength that kept humans fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. Because someone has to care what happens to humans out here in alien space, he said. Because my brother died believing that we protect our own no matter what it costs us. Kate spoke up for the first time since Jake had seen her. Your brother knew our family, she said. His name was Danny Martinez. He tried to save our parents when the pirates attacked our ship. Jake felt his heart skip a beat. He had known that Danny died trying to help the Sullivan family, but he had not realized how much the girls knew about his sacrifice. Danny was a good man, Jake said softly. He would have wanted me to help you if I could. How much money do you have left? Amy asked with the practical tone of someone who had learned not to trust in miracles. Jake checked his account balance on his computer. About 8,000 credits, he admitted. Not enough to get us all back to human space on a commercial transport. Amy's face went pale, but she did not panic. Instead, she started thinking out loud about their options. We need to find a freight captain who will take passengers for less money, she said. Someone who is already going toward human space and has room for 3 more people. Jake was impressed by how quickly Amy was adapting to their situation. Most people would have been overwhelmed by everything that had just happened, but she was already planning their next move. I know of one possibility, he said. There's a captain named Ben Torres who runs supplies to the outer colonies. His ship is called the Liberty's Call, and it should be docked here on level 7. They left the collection area and began walking through the station corridors toward the docking levels. Jake tried to move normally, but his wounded arm was getting worse with each step. Blood was seeping through his bandage, and his shirt was now completely soaked on the left side. Kate noticed his condition first. You're hurt badly, she said with concern in her voice. We need to get you to a medical center. Not until we're off this station, Jake replied. If I check into a medical center, they'll ask questions and run scans. That will leave a paper trail that Vorthak or other bounty hunters can follow. As they walked through the station, Jake began to notice that they were attracting attention. Groups of aliens would stop talking when they passed by, and then start whispering among themselves after they had gone. News of the auction was spreading quickly through the criminal networks. Jake's computer chirped with an incoming message. When he looked at the screen, his blood ran cold. Bounty posted, the message read. Jake Martinez wanted alive for questioning. Reward 75,000 credits. Contact station security for details. We have a problem, Jake said as he showed the message to Amy and Kate. Someone has put a price on my head. That means every bounty hunter and mercenary on this station is going to be looking for us. Amy studied the message carefully. 75,000 credits is a lot of money, she said. But it's less than what you paid for us. That means whoever posted the bounty doesn't know about the treasure account your brother left you. They think you're just a lucky gambler who hit it big. Jake had not thought about it that way, but Amy was right. If Vorthak or whoever posted the bounty knew about the crashed colony ship, they would have offered much more money. The fact that they were only offering 75,000 credits meant they thought Jake was a small-time player who had gotten lucky. They reached the docking level and began looking for Bay 94, where Ben Torres kept his ship. The docking level was a maze of corridors and loading areas filled with aliens of every species Jake had ever seen. Most of them were legitimate traders and merchants, but Jake knew that some were smugglers and criminals who would gladly turn him in for the bounty money. As they walked through the crowded corridors, Jake began to feel dizzy again. The blood loss was starting to affect his thinking, and his legs felt unsteady. Amy noticed his condition and moved closer to support him if he started to fall. How far is it to the ship? Kate asked as she looked around nervously at all the aliens surrounding them. Should be just around this next corner, Jake replied, but his voice sounded weak even to his own ears. They turned the corner and stopped dead in their tracks. Bay 94 was surrounded by station security forces. At least a dozen armed guards were positioned around the entrance to the docking bay. They were checking the identification of everyone who tried to enter or leave the area. In the center of the security cordon stood the same Klaxon bounty hunter who had been bidding on Amy and Kate at the auction. The insect-like alien was talking to the security chief and pointing in different directions as if giving instructions for a search. They found us, Kate whispered in a voice full of fear. Jake leaned against the wall, trying to think clearly despite the pain and dizziness. They could not go back the way they had come, because more security forces were probably already searching the lower levels. They could not go forward because the docking bay was blocked, and they could not stay where they were because someone would eventually recognize them and claim the bounty. There has to be another way, Amy said as she studied the layout of the docking level. Maybe we can find a maintenance tunnel or service corridor that leads to a different docking bay. Jake nodded, but he was not sure he had the strength to keep running much longer. His wounded arm was throbbing with pain, and he could feel himself getting weaker by the minute. If they were going to escape from Station Omega-7, it would have to be soon before he collapsed completely. As they stood there trying to figure out their next move, Jake's computer chirped again with another incoming message. This one was different from the bounty notice. It was a private communication from someone using an encrypted channel. Mr. Martinez, the message read. I am Captain Ben Torres of the Liberty's Call. I heard about your situation through the station gossip network. If you can get to Bay 78 instead of Bay 94, I might be able to help you. But you need to hurry because I'm scheduled to depart in 30 minutes. Vorthak stared at Jake for a long moment with his golden eyes burning with rage. The big lizard alien was not used to being challenged by anyone, especially not by a wounded human who looked like he was about to fall over. Vorthak had built his reputation on being the richest and most feared slave trader in this part of the galaxy. He could not let some nobody human make him look weak in front of all these other buyers. 50,000 credits. Vorthak roared so loud that his voice echoed off the walls of the auction hall. Many aliens in the crowd gasped and whispered to each other. 50,000 credits was an enormous amount of money to pay for 2 slaves even if they were healthy young humans. Some of the smaller buyers began to back away from the bidding area. They knew they could never compete with numbers that high. Jake felt his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. His wounded arm was getting worse and he could feel himself getting weaker from the blood loss. But he thought about his brother Danny lying dead on the floor of the Sullivan family ship. He thought about all the other humans who had disappeared into the alien slave trade, while the human government did nothing to stop it. Someone had to take a stand and fight back even if it meant risking everything. 100,000 credits, Jake called out in a voice that was louder and stronger than he thought he could manage. This time the silence in the auction hall was so complete that Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Even the Zephyrian seller looked shocked by the bid. 100,000 credits was more money than most people saw in their entire lives. It was enough to buy a small spaceship or a house on a nice planet. Vorthak's mouth fell open, showing all his sharp yellow teeth. For the first time since Jake had seen him, the big alien looked uncertain. Vorthak was rich, but he was also a businessman. He knew when to cut his losses and walk away from a bad deal. Spending more than 100,000 credits on 2 human slaves would be financial suicide even for someone as wealthy as him. The Zephyrian seller slid down from his platform and moved closer to Jake. His green scales shimmered under the bright lights as he studied the bleeding human with new interest. The seller could smell the money now, and his eyes gleamed with greed like a hungry predator who had found fresh meat. "Sir, I must verify these funds immediately," the seller said in his smooth voice. 100,000 credits is a very large sum of money. I am sure you understand that we must be certain the payment can be completed before we proceed. Jake nodded and pulled out his computer again. His hands were shaking so badly now that he almost dropped it twice. The blood loss was making him dizzy, and the bright lights of the auction hall seemed to pulse and flicker in front of his eyes. But he managed to access the hidden account that his brother had left him. The account contained the location, coordinates of the crashed colony ship along with detailed scans, showing exactly what treasures were hidden inside it. There were tons of rare earth metals that were worth fortunes on the open market. There were also precious gems and ancient human artifacts that collectors would pay millions to own. All of it was just sitting there on an empty planet waiting for someone to come and claim it. Jake transferred 100,000 credits from the treasure account into his main account. The money moved through the galactic banking system in seconds. As soon as the transfer was complete, Jake felt a strange mix of triumph and despair wash over him. He had just spent almost everything he had to save 2 girls he had never met before today. The verification process took several long minutes while the entire crowd waited in tense silence. Jake tried to stay standing, but his legs felt like they were made of water. He could see Amy and Kate Sullivan watching him from the platform where they still knelt in their chains. Amy had tears in her green eyes, but she was trying to stay strong for her younger sister. Kate looked like she was in shock from everything that was happening around her. Finally, the computer made another soft beeping sound. The Zephyrian seller looked at his screen and his snake-like face broke into a huge smile. "The funds have been successfully verified," he announced in a voice full of excitement. 100,000 credits from the human bidder. This is now the highest bid we have received today. Do I hear any counteroffers from the floor? All eyes turned to Vorthak, who was still standing frozen in place like a statue. The big alien's claws scraped against his expensive armor as his hands opened and closed in anger. Jake could see that Vorthak wanted to bid higher, but even someone as rich as him had limits. Spending more than 100,000 credits on slaves would damage his reputation as a smart businessman. "Going once," the seller called out as he looked around the room for any other bidders. No one else raised their hand or spoke up. The other aliens in the crowd were smart enough to know when they were beaten. None of them had come to the auction expecting to spend that kind of money on 2 human slaves. "Going twice," the seller continued with growing excitement in his voice. Vorthak took one step forward like he was going to make another bid, but then he stopped himself. His golden eyes locked onto Jake's face, and the look of pure hatred there made Jake's blood run cold. Vorthak was memorizing every detail of Jake's appearance. This was not over between them. Sold to the human bidder for 100,000 credits, the seller finally announced. A few aliens in the crowd clapped their hands or made other sounds of approval. Most of them just stared at Jake like he was some kind of strange creature they had never seen before. A human who would spend that much money to buy other humans was something new and unexpected in their experience. Jake felt his knees start to buckle as the reality of what he had just done hit him. He had saved Amy and Kate Sullivan, but he had also spent nearly every credit he had in the process. After paying for the slaves and the various fees and taxes that came with the purchase, he would have less than 10,000 credits left. That was not enough money to get them all off the station, let alone transport them safely back to human space. The seller was already making arrangements for the transfer of ownership. Jake would need to go to the collection area and sign papers to officially take possession of the two girls. Then they would be his responsibility and his problem to solve. As Jake made his way through the crowd toward the exit, several aliens stepped aside to let him pass. Some looked at him with respect while others looked at him like he was completely insane. Jake did not care what they thought about him. All that mattered was that Amy and Kate Sullivan would not be going home with Vorthak tonight. But as he walked toward the collection area, Jake realized that his problems were just beginning. Spending that much money had made him famous throughout the station. Word would spread quickly through the criminal networks that there was a human with deep pockets walking around. That made him a target for every thief and bounty hunter on Station Omega 7. He also had to figure out how to get the girls off the station and back to safety with almost no money left. Commercial transport back to human space would cost thousands of credits per person. Even if he could find a ship captain willing to take them, the journey would be dangerous and expensive. Jake's wounded arm was getting worse by the minute, and he knew he needed medical attention soon. But first he had to collect Amy and Kate and find somewhere safe for them to hide while he figured out their next move. The auction hall was not a safe place for any of them to stay. As he reached the collection area, Jake saw the two sisters being led toward him by a pair of robot guards. Amy was still holding Kate's hand and whispering something in her ear that Jake could not hear. When Amy's green eyes met his, Jake saw gratitude there mixed with fear and confusion. She was probably wondering why a complete stranger had just spent a fortune to buy their freedom. Jake wondered the same thing himself. All he knew was that it had felt like the right thing to do, and he hoped they would all live long enough for him to figure out what came next. Jake Martinez walked through the bright halls of Station Omega 7 with blood on his shirt and pain in his left arm. The bounty hunter had shot him good during his escape from the mining colony on Centauri Prime, but Jake did not have time to worry about the wound right now. He had something much more important to do and very little time to do it. His small computer showed him the numbers he did not want to see. 847 credits left in his account. That was all the money he had in the whole galaxy, and it was not nearly enough for what he needed to buy today. The slave auction hall stood in front of him like a giant metal beast. Two big alien guards stood at the entrance. They were Vraxians with thick purple skin and 4 arms each. They carried energy weapons that could cut a man in half. Jake knew that inside the hall 2 human girls were about to be sold to whoever paid the most money for them. Amy and Kate Sullivan were their names. Amy was 20 years old and Kate was 18. They had been taken from their family ship when space pirates attacked it near the edge of human space. Their parents were dead, and now the girls were going to be sold like animals at this terrible place. Jake pushed through the crowd of alien buyers. His head felt dizzy from losing blood, but he kept moving forward. The auction had already started, and he could hear the voice of the seller calling out prices. On a raised platform in the center of the room, the 2 sisters sat together on their knees. They wore simple gray clothes and had chains around their wrists. Their eyes were full of fear as they looked out at all the creatures who wanted to buy them. The seller was a snake-like alien called a Zephyrian. His skin was green and shiny, and he had no legs. Instead, he moved by sliding his long body across the floor. His voice was loud and clear as he spoke to the crowd. "Here we have lot number 47, the Zephyrian said. 2 human females in perfect health. No sickness and no defects in their bodies. Both are young and strong. The bidding starts at 5,000 credits. A big insect-like creature raised one of its forearms. It had huge black eyes and sharp teeth. 6,000 credits, it said in a clicking voice. Jake felt his heart sink into his stomach. He watched as more aliens called out higher and higher prices. 8,000 credits, 10,000 credits, 12,000 credits. The numbers kept going up and up while Jake stood there knowing he could never pay that much money. The alien who was winning the bidding was the worst one Jake could imagine. His name was Vorthak the Collector, and he was known throughout the galaxy as one of the cruelest slave owners alive. Vorthak looked like a giant lizard that walked on two legs. His skin was dark red and covered in scales. His teeth were yellow and sharp and his eyes glowed like gold coins. He wore expensive clothes and jewelry to show how rich he was. Vorthak had bought hundreds of humans over the years. Some he used as workers in his mines on distant planets. Others he kept as pets in his private collection. None of them were ever seen again once they disappeared into his ships. Jake had heard stories about Vorthak that made his blood run cold. The alien enjoyed hurting humans and making them suffer for his entertainment. 15,000 credits, Vorthak called out in his deep, rough voice. He sounded confident like he knew no one could pay more than him. The Zephyrian seller looked around the room to see if anyone else wanted to bid higher. 15,000 credits going once, he said slowly. Jake stepped closer to the front of the crowd. His wounded arm was getting worse and he could feel warm blood soaking through his bandage. Every step hurt, but he forced himself to keep moving. He thought about his brother Danny, who had died trying to protect the Sullivan family during the pirate attack. Danny had made Jake promise to look after any humans who needed help if something happened to him. The seller continued his countdown. 15,000 credits going twice. Jake looked up at the two girls on the platform. Amy was holding her younger sister Kate close to her. Even from far away, Jake could see that Amy was trying to be brave for Kate, even though she was just as scared. The older sister had green eyes that reminded Jake of his dead brother. Those same eyes that never gave up even when things looked impossible. Jake raised his good arm high in the air. 25,000 credits, he shouted loud enough for everyone in the hall to hear him. The entire room went quiet. Hundreds of alien faces turned to stare at the bleeding human, who had just offered more money than most of them made in a year. Jake could feel their eyes on him like hot laser beams. Some looked surprised. Others looked angry. A few looked like they wanted to laugh at him. Vorthak spun around to see who had dared to bid against him. When his golden eyes found Jake, his face twisted into an expression of pure rage. His long tail whipped back and forth behind him like an angry snake. "Who is this pathetic human?" Vorthak growled. "He does not look like he has 25 credits, let alone 25,000. The Zephyrian seller slid closer to Jake. His forked tongue flicked out to taste the air. "Sir, you will need to show proof that you have the money before I can accept your bid," he said. His voice was polite, but Jake could hear doubt in it. Jake pulled out his small computer with shaking fingers. He knew he was about to do something that could never be undone. There was a secret account that his brother had told him about before he died. Danny had found the location of an old human colony ship that had crashed on a distant planet many years ago. The ship was full of rare metals and gems worth millions of credits. Danny had died before he could go there and claim the treasure, but he had given Jake the access codes to the account where the information was stored. Jake had sworn he would never touch that money unless it was a matter of life and death. Looking up at Amy and Kate Sullivan, he knew that this was exactly that kind of situation. If he did not act now, those girls would disappear forever into Vorthak's collection, and no one would ever see them again. His fingers moved across the computer screen as he accessed the hidden account. The numbers that appeared made his eyes go wide. There was enough money there to buy a whole fleet of spaceships. More than enough to outbid everyone in this room, including Vorthak himself. The verification process seemed to take forever while everyone waited and watched. Jake could feel blood dripping down his arm and onto the floor. His vision was starting to blur from the pain and blood loss, but he forced himself to stay standing. He caught Amy Sullivan looking at him from the platform, and he saw a tiny spark of hope appear in her green eyes before she quickly looked away. Finally, the computer made a soft beeping sound. The Zephyrian seller looked at the screen and his eyes grew huge with greed. "The funds have been verified," he announced to the crowd. 25,000 credits from the human bidder. "Do I hear any higher offers?" Vorthak was so angry that steam seemed to come out of his nose. But even he could not throw away that much money on 2 slaves when he had no idea how much more the human might be willing to pay.